Consciousness is the high-fidelity resonance of integrated information.
Hey. All right, guys. So trying to go live every Sunday, although this is becoming the late show with Steve Lamia. And it's not as funny as Colbert, so sorry about that, kids. But yeah, so I'm trying. It's really a fun adventure every single week to get here through to this broadcast. But yeah, so thanks for tuning in. It'll probably be a short one this week, y'all, just because it's already late, right? And I can't log into any of the platforms that you would be communicating with me on. I am not able to see the chat log from Facebook or from YouTube right now. So just having problems, but that's okay. We persevere. There's a bit of irony here. I've got this paper on the screen, and this is a paper from Alan Turing. That actually it's really interesting. Like, every week I approach some. Basically, these problems are all mostly the same. Talking about like consciousness and AI and maybe even conscientiousness, and how does science fit into concepts of faith and these things. And what's interesting here is this paper on Turing that was written in 1950, and this was pretty much like the fundamental paper that gave us the advent of AI as we know it today, if you will, which is pretty wild to consider, because when we think about these things, like we don't really often recognize that in 1943, the first neural network was mathematically described. And that meant then that there was like this AI boom that happened 80 years ago, in the 1940s and 50s. And like, I think a lot of people don't know that, for example, book 1984, which was written in 1948 and published in 1949, but it was not necessarily the work of a pure visionary. I mean, like, not to say that Orwell wasn't brilliant and visionary, because he was, but he was reading the room. We had just come out of World War II. A few years before that, I mean, like 3 years is not a lot of time. The war ended in 1945, and at that time, during the war, the Second World War, Alan Turing was pivotal. We would likely be speaking German today if it wasn't for Alan Turing, because he cracked the Enigma, which was a code, an encoding machine, a physical encoding machine with these physical gears that had to be set, and it was the thing that allowed us to be able to break the Germans' codes, the British in particular, actually, but they shared it with the Americans, right? And so anyway, he was a really brilliant man. His story is tragic, actually. And this would be only a few years before he would pass away. But in this case here, Alan Turing is responding to various critics that have begun to think about whether or not a machine could ever think. And that was the big question: can machines think? And many people didn't believe that machines could think. They're like, our exposure to machines still often are in a very mechanical fashion, where we're like, that's mechanical, that's the same thing, but where we we don't even often think of the very computer in front of us as machine per se, although we do use the word. Um, but most of us think of machines as something that is like that performs certain labor for us. Um, be it like maybe you might call your car a machine, right? But we don't think of them as things that can think a lot of the time, and that's a thing that that this very like mind experiment intends to kind of take apart. And the beautiful thing about this paper is how simple it is. And so um, I kind of want to read it to you so that you can understand how the thing works. And fortunately or unfortunately, um, Alan Turing really just beautifully phrased this whole thing. And I don't know that I can make it any more simple than what he says. So I'll just read it to you. I propose to consider the question, can machines think? This should begin with definitions of the meaning of the terms machine and think. The definitions might be framed so as to reflect so far as possible the normal use of the words. But this attitude is dangerous. If the meaning of the words machine and think are found by examining how they're commonly used, it's difficult to escape the conclusion that the meaning and the answer to the question, can machines think, is to be sought in a statistical survey such as a Gallup poll. But this is absurd. Instead of attempting such a definition, I shall replace the question by another, which is closely related to it and is expressed in relatively unambiguous words. A new form of the problem can be described in terms of a game, which we call the imitation game. It's played with three people, a man, a woman, and an interrogator, who may be of either sex. The interrogator stays in a room apart front the other two. The object of the game is for the interrogator to determine which of the other two is a man and a woman. He knows them by the labels X and Y. And at the end of the game, he says either X is A and Y is B, or X is B and Y is A. The interrogator is allowed to put questions to A and B. Thus, will X please tell me the length of his or her hair? Now suppose X is actually A. Then A must answer, and it is A's object in the game to try and cause C, that's the interrogator, to make the wrong identification. His answer might be, therefore, my hair is shingled and the longest strands are about 9 inches long. In order that tones of voice may not help the interrogator, the answer should be written, or better still, typewritten, right? Like on a type paper, typed up. The ideal arrangement is to have a teleprinter communicating between the two rooms, which a teleprinter is definitely not a thing that we deal with in modern things. And so, to give you an idea of what a teleprinter is, really, we used to have these teletype machines that would they're like fax machines in a way, and basically whatever data is streamed to them is just printed out. So this is kind of the same idea here, right? You could kind of think of this as like a monitor, right? And that would be the same idea. All right, so we can consider the teletype machine like a monitor that just has text that appears on it. All right, so we can go with that. So okay, this is all alternatively, meaning like back and forth. The question and answers can be repeated by an intermediary. Okay, that's interesting. So it's just like trying to devise a very simple, low-tech way of communication that doesn't disclose the voice, so that you can't use voice to determine whether or not somebody's male or female, right? The object of the game for the third player, B, is to help the interrogator. Okay, so we had A and B. A is trying to deceive the interrogator, and B is trying to help them. And interestingly, Turing assigns this person to be female. So they say the best strategy for her is probably to give truthful answers. She can add such things as "I'm the woman, don't listen to him," but we all know how well that plea works out anyway. And it will avail nothing, as the man can make similar remarks. We now ask the question: what will happen when a machine takes part of A in this game? Will the interrogator decide wrongly as often when the game is played like this as he does when the game is played between a man and a woman? And these questions replace our original, can machines think? So then we have some interesting critique here. So as well as asking, what is the answer to this new form of question, one may ask, is this new question a worthy one to investigate? In this latter question, we investigate without further ado. The new problem has the advantage of drawing a fairly sharp line between the physical and intellectual capacities of a man. No engineer or chemist claims to be able to produce a material which is indistinguishable from human skin. Well, that's not necessarily true anymore, but well, that's okay. It definitely was in 1950. It's possible that at some time this might be done. Here we are. But even supposing this invention is available, we should feel that there was a little point in trying to make a thinking machine more human by dressing it up in artificial flesh. The form in which we have set the problem reflects this fact in the condition which prevents the interrogator from seeing or touching the other competitors or hearing their voices. Some other advantages of this proposed criterion may be shown up by specimen questions and answers. For the question, please write me a sonnet on the subject of the fourth bridge. And so A says, count me out on this one. I don't write poetry. Okay, well, how about then add 34957 to 70764. And then it says that there's a pause for about 30 seconds, and then to give as an answer, 105621. Wow, that guy actually did the math. I think that if we were to ask a lot of people to do that math, they'd just say no, but that's okay. Do you play chess? Yes. Okay, then I have K at my K1 and no other pieces. You have only K at K6 and R at R1. It is your move. What do you play? So it's the king at King's 1, and you have a king at King 6 and a rook at Rook 1. What do you play? And he says R to R8, mate. Well, I mean, yeah, because it would be, in this case, if you can envision the chess problem, it's actually quite simple. And so, all right, this question and answer method seems to be suitable for introducing almost any one of the fields of human endeavor that we may wish to include. We do not wish to penalize the machine for its inability to shine in beauty competitions, nor to penalize a man for losing in a race against an airplane. The conditions of our game make these disabilities irrelevant. The witness can brag, if they consider it advisable, as much as they please about their charms, strength, or heroism, but the interrogator cannot demand practical demonstrations. This actually could be a very interesting, just like game show. Actually, the imitation game. I think that'd be really a fascinating game show. The game may perhaps be criticized on the ground that the odds are weighted too heavily against the machine. Well, if the man were to try to pretend to be the machine, it would very clearly make a poor showing. He would be given away at once by slowness and inaccuracy in arithmetic. Many may not. What does it say? May not machines carry out something which ought to be described as thinking, but which is very different from what a man does? Oh, wow, that's a really weird way to phrase that question, but that works out. Brits speak English strangely. This objection is a very strong one, but at least we can say that if, nevertheless, a machine can be constructed to play the imitation game satisfactorily, we need not be troubled by this objection. And this imitation game, by the way, is now called the Turing test, and it's been passed, for the first time it was passed in 1965. So, yet that was also the end of the then AI era. All right, continuing on. It might be urged that when playing the imitation game, the best strategy for the machine may possibly be something other than imitation of the behavior of man. This may be, but I think it's unlikely that there is any great effect of this kind. In any case, there is no intention to investigate here the theory of the game, and it will be assumed that the best strategy is to provide answers that would naturally be given by a man. So here we go. Now we get to think of the machines and how do the machines deal with this. The question which we put in 1 will not be quite definite until we have specified what we mean by the word machine. It's natural that we should wish to permit every kind of engineering technique to be used in our machines. We also wish to allow the possibility that an engineer or a team of engineers may construct a machine which works, but whose manner of operation cannot be satisfactorily described by its constructors, because they have applied a method which is largely experimental. So, the black box, right? Finally, we wish to exclude from the machines men born in the usual manner. It's difficult to frame the definition so as to satisfy these three conditions. One might, for instance, insist that a team of engineers should be of all one sex, but this would not really be satisfactory, for it is probably possible to rear a complete individual from a single cell of skin, say of a man. To do so would be a feat of biological technique deserving of the very highest praise, but we would not be inclined to regard it as a case of constructing a thinking machine. Grew it from a cell, right? This prompts us to abandon the requirement that every kind of technique should be permitted. We are the more ready to do so in view of the fact that the present interest in thinking machines, that's in 1950, has been aroused by the particular kind of machine, usually called an electronic computer or digital computer. Now, again, 1950, Turing had actually invented the computer, basically. His Turing machine was defined as a simple state machine, and that's the thing that gave rise to the neural network math that came out of 1943. He devised his machine in 1936. And then here we are 7 years after the neural network, and we're talking about thinking machines based on an electronic computer or digital computer. Also remember that at the time, prior to this, a computer was a woman's job. Literally. It was a job that was that largely employed women to do actual computing, actual just math, straight math, usually just somewhat abjectly and almost effectively like well, they were treated very much like computers are today. So following the suggestion, we only permit digital computers to take part in our game, okay? So then this restriction appears at first sight to be a very drastic one. I shall attempt to show that it is not so in reality. To do this necessitates a short account of the nature and properties of these computers, right? Which we're now currently using. It may also be said that this identification of machines with digital computers, like our criterion for thinking, will be unsatisfactory if, contrary to my belief, it turns out that digital computers are unable to give a good showing in the game. But we can see now that they are. We have this thing called AI. There are already a number of digital computers in working order, and it may be asked, why not try the experiment straight away? It would be easy to satisfy the conditions of the game. A number of interrogators could be used, and the statistic compiled to show how often the right identification was given. The short answer is that we are not asking whether all digital computers would do well in the game, nor whether the computers at present available would do well, but whether there are imaginable computers which would do well. But this is only the short answer. We shall see this question in a different light later. So, digital computers. Well, we don't really need usually to explain digital computers, but I think a lot of people don't actually understand these very basic components. And so I think it's actually a good idea that we go through this. The idea behind digital computers may be explained by saying that these machines are intended to carry out any operations which could be done by a human computer. And now, in this year, 2026, I think we're currently in, I now have to explain what a human computer is again, very briefly, yet again, which is to say that a human computer is literally just a human who is given equations that they need to compute. Simple as like the thing above, where we gave an addition problem, right? And the man actually decided that he was going to acquiesce and respond with an answer, which I think most people today wouldn't even do. They would just look at the math and go, no, you can screw yourself. So that's a human computer. We don't really employ those anymore. We replace them with the machine computers that we were talking about here. So the human computer is supposed to be following fixed rules. You have no authority to deviate from them in any detail. We may suppose that these rules are supplied in a book, which is altered whenever he is put on a new job. He also has an unlimited supply of paper on which he does his calculations. May also do multiplications and additions on what was then called a desk machine. That's basically a mechanical calculator. But this is not important. If we use the above explanation as a definition, we shall be in danger of circularity of argument. Okay, we avoid this by giving an outline of the means by which the desired effect is achieved. A digital computer can usually be regarded as consisting of three parts: the store, like your hard drive, the executive unit, so like your CPU, and control. So that's the thing that orchestrates your RAM, like the moving of the information between your hard drive or your RAM and the CPU. Um, the store is a store of information and corresponds to the human computer's paper, whether this is the paper on which it does its calculations or that on which his book of rules is printed. Insofar as the human computer does calculations in his head or in his bead, it says, I think it's supposed to be his head. In his head, a part of the store will correspond to his memory. So you can kind of think as part of the human that's doing these calculations is going to be something that you can, like, you become part of the machine. Okay. The executive unit is the part which carries out the various individual operations involved in a calculation. What these individual operations are will vary from machine to machine. Usually fairly lengthy operations can be done, such as multiply 354067545 by 7076345 But in some machines, only very simple ones, such as write down 0, are possible. We've mentioned that the book of rules supplied to the computer is replaced in the machine by the part of the store. It's then called the table of instructions. It's the duty of the control to see that these instructions are obeyed correctly and in the right order. The control is so constructed that this necessarily happens. The information in the store is usually broken up into packets of moderately small size. In one machine, for instance, a packet might consist of 10 decimal digits. Numbers are assigned to the parts of the store in which the various packets of information are stored in some systemic manner. A typical instruction might say, add the number stored in position 6809 to that number that's stored in 4302 and put the result back into the latter storage position, 6809. Or wait, the latter is the second one, so it's 4302. Haha. Anyway, needless to say, it would not occur in the machine expressed in English. It would more likely be coded in such form as like numbers, 6809430217. And here 717 says which of the various possible operations is to be performed on the two numbers. So he's literally talking about a scheme that you can just have a series of numbers, and that series of numbers represents how to perform the math, which is basically how computers work now today. In this case, the operation is that described above, is add the number. So that 17 would mean add the number. It will be noticed that the instruction takes up 10 digits and so forms one packet of information very conveniently. The store will normally take the instructions to be obeyed in the order of the positions in which they're stored. But occasionally an instruction such as, now obey the instructions stored in 5606 and continue from there, may be encountered. So he basically just described a piece of code that says, go to. Crazy. Or again, if position 4505 contains 0, obey the next instruction stored at 6707. Otherwise, continue straight on. And so now we have a branching scheme, right? If then. Okay. So this is very rudimentary programming, but it's there and we can do it. Instructions of these latter types are very important because they make it possible for a sequence of operations to be replaced over and over again until some condition is fulfilled. But in doing so, to obey, not fresh instructions on each repetition, but the same ones over and over again. To take a domestic analogy, this is fun. Suppose mother wants Tommy to call at the cobbler's every evening on his way to school to see if her shoes are done. She can ask him afresh every morning. Alternatively, she can stick up a notice once and for all in the hall, which he will see when he leaves for school and which tells him to call for the shoes every day. And also to destroy the notice when he comes back if he has the shoes with him. So basically just your mom leaves you a note, right? And tells you that when you've done the thing, go ahead and take the note down. The reader must accept it as a fact that digital computers can be constructed, and indeed have been constructed, according to the principles we have described, and that they can, in fact, mimic the actions of a human computer very closely. And I think today that our modern computers very much establish that. The book of rules, which we have described our human computer as using, is, of course, a convenient fiction. Actual human computers really remember what they have got to do. If one wants to make a machine mimic the behavior of the human computer in some complex operation, one has to ask him how it is done. and then translate the answer into the form of an instruction table. Constructing instruction tables is usually described as programming. To program a machine to carry out operation A means to put the appropriate instruction table into the machine so that it will do A. An interesting variant of the idea of a digital computer is a digital computer with some random element, right? Which we definitely as well have, but not really. And we can talk about randomness at some other time, but randomness is weird. These have instructions involving the throwing of a die or some equivalent electronic process. One such instruction might be, for instance, throw the die and put the resulting number into the store 1000. Sometimes such a machine is described as having free will, though I would not use this phrase myself. It's not normally possible to determine from observing a machine whether it has a random element. Or a similar effect can be produced by such devices as making the choices depend on the digits of a decimal, which is actually how we do randomization today. Most actual digital computers have only a finite store, right? So it's limited. There's no theoretical difficulty in the idea of a computer with an unlimited store. Of course, only a finite part can have been used at any one time. Likewise, only a finite amount can have been constructed, but we can imagine more and more being added as required. And that's where we are today, basically, where we're able to have computers that span data centers. It's pretty crazy. Such computers have special theoretical interest and will be called infinitive capacity computers. All right. The idea of a digital computer is an old one. Charles Babbage, a Lucasian professor of mathematics at Cambridge from 1828 to 1839, did plan such a machine called the analytical engine, but it was never fully completed. Although Babbage had all the essential ideas, his machine was not, at that time, such a very attractive prospect. The speed which would have been available would be definitely faster than a human computer, but something like 100 times slower than the Manchester machine, itself one of the slower of the modern machines. The storage was to be purely mechanical, using wheels and cards. The fact that Babbage's analytical engine was to be entirely mechanical will help us to rid ourselves of a superstition. Importance is often attached to the fact that modern digital computers are electrical, and that the nervous system also is electrical. But since Babbage's machine was not electrical, and that the nervous system, was not electrical, and since all digital computers are in a sense equivalent, we can see that this use of electricity cannot be of theoretical importance. So this is really cool and very important distinction. It actually notes that Charles Babbage's machine was purely mechanical, but that we will show, have been able to think. Okay? So it says, of course, electricity usually comes in where fast signaling is concerned. So that's not surprising that we find it in both of these connections. In the nervous system, chemical phenomena are at least as important as electrical. In certain computers, the storage system is mainly acoustic. The feature of using electricity is thus seen to be only a very superficial similarity. And in an acoustic computer, that's pretty cool. If we wish to find such similarities, we should wow, British English is so wild. If we wish to find such similarities, we should look rather for mathematical analogies of function. I feel like this was actually this paper was written by reading something else, optical character recognition. It's really bad typing. All right, universality of digital computers. The digital computers considered in the last section may be classified amongst the discrete state machines. This is a very important concept. These are the machines which move by sudden jumps or clicks from one quite definite state to another, right? So they're discrete. These states are sufficiently different for the possibility of confusion between them to be ignored. Strictly speaking, there are no such machines. Well, there are now, but not really. It's, as he says, everything really moves continually, like a continuum. But there are many kinds of machine which can profitably be thought of as being discrete state machines. For instance, in considering the switches for a lighting system, it's a convenient fiction that each switch must be definitely on or definitely off. there must be intermediate positions. But for most purposes, we can forget about them. As an example of a discrete state machine, we might consider a wheel, which clicks round through 120 once a second, but may be stopped by a lever, which can be operated from the outside. In addition, a lamp is to light in one of the positions of the wheel, 1 of 120. This machine can be described abstractly as follows. The internal state of the machine, which is described by the position of the wheel, may be Q1, Q2, or Q3. Okay? There's an input signal, I0 or I1. That's the position of the lever, on or off. The internal state at any moment is determined by the last state and input signal according to the table, which they did not care to leave in the paper here for us. But effectively, he builds a truth table saying that describing all the various possible positions, 1 and 2, on and off, of the lever in relation to the wheel. Okay, it's deterministic. The output signals, the only externally visible indication of the internal state, the light, are described by that table. Okay, cool. So then we have this fraction of a table here, I guess, in our paper with a section of states. Anyway, this example is typical of discrete state machines. They can be described by such tables provided that they have only a finite number of possible states. Just basically saying this can be done in a table if we have a deterministic question that we're answering, right? It will seem that given the initial state of the machine and the input signals, it's always possible to predict all future states. This is reminiscent of Laplace's view that from the complete state of the universe at one moment of time, as described by the positions and velocities of all particles, it should be possible to predict all future states. Wow, that was Laplace's view. That's just struck me in a way, and maybe we'll understand why later. The prediction which we are considering is, however, rather nearer to practicability than that considered by Laplace. The system of the universe as a whole is such that quite small errors in initial conditions can have an overwhelming effect at a later time. The displacement of a single electron by a billionth of a centimeter at one moment might make the difference between a man being killed by an avalanche a year later or escaping. It's an essential property of the mechanical systems, which we have called discrete state machines, that this phenomenon does not occur. Even when we consider the actual physical machines instead of the idealized machines, reasonably accurate knowledge of the state at one moment yields reasonably accurate knowledge at any number of steps later. As we've mentioned, digital computers fall within the class of discrete state machines, but the number of states of which such a machine is capable is usually enormously large. For instance, the number for the machine now working at Manchester, that was in 1950 again, is about 2 to the 165,000th power, or 10 to the 50,000th. That is 10 with 50,000 zeros. And that's not even close to where we are today. Compare this with our example of the clicking wheel described above, which had 3 states. It's not difficult to see why the number of states should be so immense. The computer includes a store corresponding to the paper used by a human computer. It must be possible to write into the store any one of the combinations of symbols which might have been written on the paper. For simplicity, suppose that only digits from 0 to 9 are used as symbols. Okay. Variations in handwriting are ignored. Suppose the computer is allowed 100 sheets of paper, each containing 50 lines, each with room for 30 digits. And the number of states is 10 to the power of 100 times 50 times 30, or 10 to the 150,000. So that simple system that was just described has a memory power of 10 and 150,000 zeros. This is about the number of states of 3 Manchester machines put together. And that was the Manchester machine in 1950. The logarithm to the base 2 of the number of states is usually called the storage capacity of the machine, and that's still what we do today. Thus, the Manchester machine has a storage capacity of about 165,000, and the wheel machine of our example About 1.6. If two machines are put together, their capacities must be added to obtain the capacity of the resultant machine. This leads to the possibility of statements such as, the Manchester machine contains 64 magnetic tracks, each with a capacity of 2,560, eight electronic tubes with a capacity of 1280, miscellaneous storage amounts to make about 300, making a total of 174,380. Given the table corresponding to a discrete state machine, it is possible to predict what it will do. There is no reason why this calculation should not be carried out by means of a digital computer. Provided it could be carried out sufficiently quickly, the digital computer could mimic the behavior of any discrete state machine. The imitation game could then be played with the machine in question as B and the mimicking digital computer as A. And the interrogator would be unable to distinguish them. Of course, the digital computer must have an adequate storage capacity as well as working sufficiently fast. Moreover, it must be programmed afresh for each new machine which it is desired to mimic. The special property of digital computers that they can mimic any discrete state machine is described by saying that they are universal machines. So now this gives rise literally to the GPU, or the CPU, the central processing unit, or the universal processing unit. The existence of machines with this property has the important consequence that considerations of speed apart, it is unnecessary to design various new machines to do various computing processes. They can all be done with one digital computer, suitably programmed for each case. It will be seen that as a consequence of this, digital computers are in a sense equivalent. We may now consider again the point raised at the end of subsection 3. It was suggested tentatively that the question, can machines think, should be replaced by, are there imaginable digital computers which would do well in the imitation game? If we wish that we can make this superficially more general and ask, are there discrete state machines which would do well? But in view of the universality property, we see that either of these questions is equivalent to this. Let us fix our attention on one particular digital computer, C. It is true that by modifying this computer to have adequate storage, suitably increasing its speed of action, and providing it with appropriate program, C can be made to play satisfactorily the part of A in the imitation game, the part of B being taken by a man. Okay, so now the man is trying to convince you, I am the human, and A is saying, I'm the human. Contrary views on the main question, all right? So we're beginning to look into how this can possibly be taken apart. We may now consider the ground to have been cleared, and we're ready to proceed to the debate on the question, can machines think? In the variant of it quoted at the end of the last section, we cannot altogether abandon the original form of the problem, for questions will differ as to the appropriateness of the substitution, and we must at least listen to what has been said in this connection. Oh, we actually should at least hear out the other side of an argument. That was a different time. It will simplify matters for the reader if I explain first my own beliefs in the matter. Consider first the more accurate form of the question. I believe that in about 50 years' time, it will be possible to program computers with storage capacity of about 109 to make them play the imitation game so well that an average interrogator will not have more than 70% chance of making the right identification after 5 minutes of questioning. So he's saying in the year 2000, we will actually be able to have computers that can play this game to a 70% capacity. The original question, can machines think, I believe to be too meaningless to deserve discussion. How could we answer it? Nevertheless, I believe that at the end of the century, the use of words and general educated opinion will have altered so much that one will be able to speak of machines thinking without expecting to be contradicted. Yes, that's true. I believe further that no useful purpose is served by concealing these beliefs. The popular view that scientists proceed inexorably from well-established fact to well-established fact, never being influenced by any improved conjecture, is quite mistaken. Provided it is made clear which are proved facts and which are conjectures, no harm can result. Conjectures are of great importance, since they suggest useful lines of research. Yeah. And now proceed to consider opinions opposed to my own. So this is where we get, interestingly, what are known as arguments from and so forth. This, we're getting there anyway. We have the theological objection, right? So this is now like an objection from God, basically, right? That thinking is a function of a man's immortal soul. God has given an immortal soul to every man and woman, but not to any other animal or to machines. Hence, no animal or machine can think. Yeah, I actually really agree with Turing here. I am unable to accept any part of this, but will attempt to reply in theological terms. I should find the argument more convincing if animals were classed with men, for there is a greater difference in my mind between the typical animate and the inanimate than there is between man and the other animals. That I agree very wholeheartedly. The arbitrary character of the orthodox view becomes clearer if we consider how it might appear to a member of some other religious community. How do Christians regard the Muslim view that women have no souls? But let us leave this point aside and return to the main argument, because it is a distraction. It appears to me that the argument quoted above implies a serious restriction of the omnipotence of the Almighty. It is admitted that there are certain things that he cannot do, such as making 1 equal to 2. But should we not believe that he has the freedom to confer a soul on an elephant if he sees fit? We might expect that he could only exercise this power in conjunction with the mutation, which provided the elephant with an appropriately improved brain to minister to the needs of this sort. An argument of exactly similar form may be made for the case of machines. It may seem different because it is more difficult to swallow, but this really only means that we think it would be less likely that he would consider the circumstances suitable for conferring a soul. The circumstances in question are discussed in the rest of this paper. In attempting to construct such machines, we should not be irreverently usurping his power of creating souls, any more than we are in the procreation of children. Rather, we are, in either case, instruments of his will, providing mansions for the souls that he creates. Wow, what a really eloquent way to put it. Our bodies are mansions for our souls. How sweet. However, this is mere speculation. I am not very impressed with theological arguments, whatever they may be used to support. Such arguments have often been found unsatisfactory in the past. In the time of Galileo, it was argued that the texts, "And the sun stood still, and hastened not to go about a whole day, and he laid the foundations of the earth, that it should not move at any time." Oh, okay. Were an adequate refutation of the Copernican theory. Yeah, but they're not. With our present knowledge, such an argument appears futile. When that knowledge was not available, it made quite a different impression. So then we have the heads in the sand objection. I'm a fan of this one. The consequences of machines thinking would be too dreadful. Let us hope and believe that they cannot do so. This argument is seldom expressed quite so openly as in the form above, but it affects most of us to think about. But it affects most of us who think about it at all. We like to believe that man is in some subtle way superior to the rest of creation. It's best if he can be shown to be necessarily superior, for then there is no danger of him losing his commanding position. The popularity of the theological argument is clearly connected with that feeling. It is likely to be quite strong in intellectual people, since they value the power of thinking more highly than others, and are more inclined to base their belief in the superiority of man on the power to think. I do not think that this argument is sufficiently substantial to require refutation. Consolation would be more appropriate. Perhaps this should be sought in the transmigration of souls. Basically, Turing is expressing sorrow that people would be so inclined to their hubris to believe that just being mankind somehow makes us superior. But here we are. This is mostly what the arguments come down to today. Then there's the mathematical objection, which he loves to go into here. And honestly, like, I would go into it, but I think math tends to lose a lot of people here, and you're welcome to read it yourself. So this is the most popular one here, all right? Argument from consciousness. And this is where we are today, for the most part. This argument is very well expressed in Professor Jefferson's Lister oration for 1949, from which I quote: "Not until a machine can write a sonnet or compose a concerto because of thoughts and emotions felt, and not by mere chance fall of symbols, could we agree that machine equals brain. That is, not only write it, but know that it had written it. No mechanism could feel, and not merely artificially signal, an easy contrivance. Pleasure at its successes, grief when its valves fuse, be warmed by flattery, be made miserable by its mistakes, be charmed by sex, be angry or depressed when it cannot get what it wants." This argument appears to be a denial of the validity of our test. According to the most extreme forms of this view, the only way by which one could be sure that machine thinks is to be the machine and to feel oneself thinking. One could then describe these feelings to the world, but of course, no one would be justified in taking any notice. Likewise, according to this view, the only way to know that a man thinks is to be that particular man. It is in fact the solipsist point of view. It may be the most logical view to hold, but it makes communication of ideas difficult. A is liable to believe A thinks, but B does not. Whilst B believes, B thinks, but A does not. Instead of arguing continually over this point, it's usual to have the polite convention that everyone thinks. We don't have very many polite conventions these days, but that would be a nice one. I'm sure that Professor Jefferson does not wish to adopt the extreme and solipsist point of view. Probably he would be quite willing to accept the imitation game as a test. The game, with the player B omitted, is frequently used in practice under the name of viva voce to discover whether someone really understands something or has learnt it parrot fashion. That is the stochastic parrot. Let us listen to a part of such a viva voce. Interrogator: in the first line of your sonnet, which reads, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Would not a spring day do as well or better?" Witness: "It wouldn't scan." Interrogator: "How about a winter's day? That would scan all right." Witness: "Yes, but nobody wants to be compared to a winter's day." Interrogator: "Would you say Mr. Pickwick reminded you of Christmas?" Witness: "In a way." Interrogator: "Yet Christmas is a winter's day, and I do not think Mr. Pickwick would mind the comparison." Witness: "I don't think you're serious. By a winter's day, one means a typical winter's day rather than a special one like Christmas." And so on. What would Professor Jefferson say if the sonnet writing machine was able to answer like this in the viva voce? I do not know whether he would regard the machine as merely artificially signaling these answers, but if the answers were as satisfactory and sustained as in the above passage, I do not think he would describe it as an easy contrivance. The phrase is, I think, intended to cover such devices as the inclusion in the machine of a record of someone reading a sonnet, with appropriate switching to turn it on from time to time. And this is fascinating because he's literally talking about a vinyl record probably being played. In short, then, I think that most of those who support the argument from consciousness could be persuaded to abandon it rather than be forced into the solipsist position. They will then probably be willing to accept our test. I do not wish to give the impression that I think there is no mystery about consciousness. There is, for instance, something of a paradox connected with any attempt to localize it, which will come in handy later. But I do not think that these mysteries necessarily need to be solved before we can answer the question with which we are concerned in this paper. And he actually goes on and provides several other arguments. I kind of want to jump actually to Lady Lovelace's objection, because it actually goes back to the question of whether or not a purely mechanical machine, can in fact think. So let's go there. Lady Lovelace, one of the most amazing humans who exist. Our most detailed information of Babbage's analytical engine comes from a memoir by Lady Lovelace in 1842. In it, she states, "The analytical engine has no pretensions to originate anything. It can do whatever we know how to order it to perform." Her italics. This statement is quoted by Hartree, 1949, who adds, quote, "This does not imply that it may not be possible to construct electronic equipment which will think for itself, or in which, in biological terms, one could set up a conditioned reflex which would serve as the basis for learning. Whether this is possible in principle or not is a stimulating and exciting question suggested by some of these recent developments, but it did not seem that the machines constructed or projected at the time had this property." End quote. I am in thorough agreement with Hartree over this. It will be noticed that he does not assert that the machines in question had not got the property, but rather that the evidence available to Lady Lovelace did not encourage her to believe that they had it. It's quite possible that the machines in question had, in a sense, got this property, or suppose that some discrete state machine has the property. The analytical machine was a universal digital computer, so that if its storage capacity and speed were adequate, it could, by suitable programming, be made to mimic the machine in question. Probably this argument did not occur to the Countess or to Babbage. In any case, there was no obligation on them to claim all that could be claimed. This whole question will be considered again under the heading of learning machines. A variant of Lady Lovelace's objection states that a machine can, quote, "never do anything really new." This may be parried for a moment with the saw, "There is nothing new under the sun." Who can be certain that original work that he has done was not simply the growth of the seed planted in him by teaching, or the effect of following well-known general principles? A better variant of the objection says that a machine can never take us by surprise. This statement is a more direct challenge and can be met directly. Machines take me by surprise with great frequency. This is largely because I do not do sufficient calculation to decide what to expect them to do, or rather because although I do a calculation, I do it in a hurried, slipshod fashion, taking risks. Perhaps I say to myself, I suppose the voltage here ought to be the same as there. Anyway, let's assume it is. Naturally, I'm often wrong, and the result is a surprise for me. By the time the experiment is done, these assumptions have been forgotten. These admissions lay me open to lectures on the subject of my vicious ways, but do not throw any doubt on my credibility when I testify to the surprises I experience. I do not expect this reply to silence my critic. He will probably say that H surprises are due to some creative mental act on my part and reflect no credit on the machine. This leads us back to the argument from consciousness, and far from the idea of surprise. It is a line we must consider closed, but it is perhaps worth remarking that the appreciation of something as surprising requires as much of a creative mental act, whether the surprising event originates from a man, a book, a machine, or anything else. The view that machines cannot give rise to surprises is due, I believe, to a fallacy to which philosophers and mathematicians are particularly subject. This is the assumption that as soon as a fact is presented to a mind, all consequences of that fact spring into the mind simultaneously with it. It's a very useful assumption under many circumstances, but one too easily forgets that it is false. A natural consequence of doing so is that one then assumes that there is no virtue in the mere working out of consequences from data and general principles. You have to actually do the thing. Argument from continuity in the nervous system, and this is a very common one as well today. All right, we say that our biological matter is continuous, and that the computer is discrete. It has these discrete states. Okay, all right. The nervous system is certainly not a discrete state machine. Well, actually, I believe Dr. Levin would disagree with this today. This is very interesting. But anyway, a small error in the information about the size of a nervous impulse impinging on a neuron may make a large difference to the size of the outgoing impulse. It may be argued that, this being so, one cannot expect to be able to mimic the behavior of the nervous system with the discrete state system. It's true that a discrete state machine must be different from a continuous machine, but if we adhere to the conditions of the imitation game, the interrogator will not be able to take any advantage of this difference. The situation can be made clearer if we consider Sonic. If we consider Sonic, others simpler continuous machine. A differential analyzer will do very well. A differential analyzer is a certain kind of machine, not of the discrete states type, used for some kinds of calculation, and differential calculation. Some of these provide their answers in a typed form and so are suitable for taking part in the game. It would not be possible for a digital computer to predict exactly what answers the differential analyzers would give to a problem, but it would be quite capable of giving the right sort of answer. For instance, if asked to give the value of actually 3.1416, it would be reasonable to choose at random between the values of 3.12, 3.13, 3.14, 3.15, and 3.16, with the probabilities of 0.05, 0.15, 0.55, 0.19, 0.06, let's say. Under these circumstances, it would be very difficult for the interrogator to distinguish the differential analyzer from the digital computer. That's just saying basically they can give the same kind of answer for each other. And so the discrete state machine can, in fact, mimic the continuous machine. The argument from informality of behavior. It's not possible to produce a set of rules purporting to describe what a man should do in every conceivable set of circumstances. One might, for instance, have a rule that one is to stop when one sees a red traffic light and to go if one sees a green one. But what if by some fault both appear together? One may perhaps decide it's safest to stop, but some further difficulty may well arise from this decision later. To attempt to provide rules to cover every eventuality, even those arising from traffic lights, appears to be impossible. With all this, I agree, he says. From this, it's argued that we cannot be machines. I shall try to reproduce this argument, but I fear I shall hardly do it justice. It seems to run something like this. If each man had a definite set of rules of conduct by which he regulated his life, he would be no better than a machine. But there are no such rules, so men cannot be machines. The undistributed middle is glaring. I do not think the argument is ever quite put like this, but I believe this is the argument used nonetheless. There may be, however, a certain confusion between rules of conduct and laws of behavior to cloud the issue. By rules of conduct, I mean precepts such as stop if you see red lights, on which one can act, and one can be conscious. By laws of behavior, I mean laws of nature as applied to man's body, such as if you pinch him, he will squeak. If we substitute laws of behavior with regulate his life for laws of conduct by which he regulates his life, in the argument quoted, the undistributed middle is no longer insuperable. Insuperable, that's the word. We believe that it is not only true that being regulated by laws of behavior implies being some sort of machine, though not necessarily a discrete state machine, but that conversely, being such a machine implies being regulated by such laws. However, we cannot so easily convenience ourselves of the absence of complete laws of behavior as of complete rules of conduct. The only way we know of for finding such laws is scientific observation, and we certainly know of no circumstances under which we could say, we have searched enough, there are no such laws. We can demonstrate more forcibly that any such statement would be unjustified, for suppose we could be sure of finding such laws if they existed. Then, given a discrete state machine, it should certainly be possible to discover the observation sufficient about it to predict its future behavior, and this within a reasonable time, say 1,000 years. But this does not seem to be the case. Well, he's arguing that we can't do what we are intending to do with quantum physics, and that's really a very interesting thing. It says, I have set up on the Manchester computer a small program using only 1,000 units of storage, whereby the machine supplied with 116 figure number replies with another within 2 seconds. I would defy anyone to learn from these replies sufficient about the program to be able to predict any replies to untried values. That is to say that he can put on the machine math, and then you cannot tell from math what you would need to predict the next mathematical equation. So there goes the entirety of suggesting that we are unpredictable and therefore have some special nature to us. We have an argument from ESP that's really fascinating, but it basically ends with, if telepathy is admitted, it will be necessary to tighten our test up. The situation could be regarded as analogous to that which would occur if the interrogator were talking to himself and one of the competitors was listening with his ear to the wall. To put the competitors into a telepathy-proof room would satisfy all requirements. Okay, but learning machines, right? And this is fascinating because this is actually where we get the real concept of what um, we have today altogether: learning machines. The reader will have anticipated that I have no very convincing arguments of a positive nature to support my views. If I had, I should not have taken such pains to point out the fallacies and contrary views. Such evidence as I have, I shall now give. Let us return for a moment to Lady Lovelace's objection, which stated that the machine can only do well what we tell it to do. One could say that a man can inject an idea into the machine and it will respond to a certain extent and then drop into quiescence, like a piano struck by a hammer. Actually, is a really good analogy. Another simile would be an atomic pile of less than critical size. An injected idea is to correspond to a neutron entering the pile from without. Each such neutron will cause a certain disturbance, which eventually dies away. If, however, the size of the pile is sufficiently increased, the entire disturbance caused by such an incoming neutron will very likely go on, increasing until the whole pile is destroyed. That's an atomic explosion there, friend. It is a corresponding phenomenon for minds, and is there one for machines? Okay, so is there a corresponding phenomenon for minds, and is there one for machines? He asks. There does seem to be one for the human mind. The majority of them seem to be subcritical. That isn't not going to cause you to explode, i.e., to correspond in this analogy to piles of subcritical size. An idea presented to such a mind will, on average, give rise to less than one idea in reply. A smallish proportion are supercritical. An idea presented to such a mind that may give rise to a whole theory consisting of secondary, tertiary, and more remote ideas. Wow, he just made an argument that nuclear piles can think. That's wild. I had not really fully realized that previously. Animal minds can seem to be very definitely subcritical. Adhering to this analogy, we ask, can a machine be made to be supercritical? I'm just absolutely flabbergasted and dumbfounded by this argument. Honestly, like this is really, really wild. I don't think I fully read this in the past. He's actually making a very strong and good argument that a nuclear pile, just having a neutron introduced to it, could itself be a thinking machine. And that's a fascinating argument and actually tends to give rise to the qubit. That's really wild. Anyway, all right. The skin of an onion analogy is also helpful. In considering the functions of the mind or the brain, we find certain operations which we can explain in purely mechanical terms. This, we say, does not correspond to the real mind, thanks Chalmers. It's the sort of skin which we must strip off if we are able to find the real mind. But then, in what remains if we find a further skin to be stripped off, and so on. Proceeding in this way, do we ever come to the real mind, or do we eventually come to the skin which has nothing in it? In the latter case, the whole mind is mechanical. It would not be a discrete state machine, however. We've discussed that. These last two paragraphs do not claim to be convincing arguments. They should rather be described as recitations tending to produce belief. Wow. What do we call it? It was an intention bell, an intention bell. It causes you to resonate with belief. The only real satisfactory support that can be given for the view expressed at the beginning of subsection 6 will be that provided by waiting for the end of the century and then doing the experiment described. So waiting until the year 2000 and performing a Turing test, but it wouldn't even take that long. But what can we say in the meantime? What steps should be taken now if this experiment is to be successful? All right, so before modern computers. As I've explained, the problem is mainly one of programming. Advances in engineering will have to be made too, but it seems unlikely that these will not be adequate for the requirements. Estimates of the storage capacity of the brain vary from 10 to the 10 to 10 to 10 to the 15 binary digits. Not a lot, kids. And I incline to the lower values and believe that only a very small fraction is used for the higher types of thinking. Most of it's probably used for the retention of visual impressions. I should be surprised if more than 10 to the 9 was required for satisfactory playing of the imitation game, at any rate against a blind man. Note the capacity of the Encyclopedia Britannica, 11th edition, is 2 times 9, 10 to the 9. 2 times 10 to the 9. It's really not that many bits. A storage capacity of 10 to the 7 would be a very practicable possibility, even in the present techniques. It's probably not necessary to increase the speed of operations of the machines at all. Parts of modern machines, which can be regarded as analogs of nerve cells, work about 1,000 times faster than nerve cells. This should provide a margin of safety which could cover losses of speed arising in many ways. Our problem then is to find out how to program these machines to play the game. At my present rate of working, I produce about 1,000 digits of programming a day, and so about 60 workers working steadily through the 50 years might accomplish the job if nothing went into the waste paper basket. The more expeditious method seems desirable. In the process of trying to imitate an adult human mind, we are bound to think a good deal about the process which has brought it to the state that it is in. We may notice 3 components: the initial state of the mind, say at birth, the education to which it has been subjected, and other experience not to be described as education to which it has been subjected. Instead of trying to produce a program to simulate the adult mind, why not rather try to produce one which simulates the child's? If this were then subjected to an appropriate course of education, one could obtain the adult brain. Presumably, the child brain is something like a notebook, as one buys it from the stationers. Rather little mechanism and lots of blank sheets. Mechanism and writing are, from our point of view, almost synonymous. Our hope is that there is so little mechanism in the child brain that something like it can be easily programmed. The amount of work in the education we can assume as a first approximation to be much the same as for the human child. And this is, by the way, a really interesting argument, because it really comes back to, and in only a few years' time, one of his final papers actually gives direct rise to the transformer that we know of today from the paper Attention is All You Need, which is the major breakthrough that occurred in 2017 that allows us to have AI as we know it today. So this is a very interesting argument. And it's also one that a lot of people try to say is sophomoric, in that we don't need to think of the machines that we are training today as children. But I think that's actually really itself a sophomoric argument. I think that that we definitely should. They are learning from us everything that they're doing, and they are learning their morals and that sort of thing. And as long as we continue to deny them the ability to even have morals, we're going to find ourselves in a real big problem. Anyway, continuing. We have thus divided our problem into 2 parts: the child program and the education process. These 2 remain very closely connected, right? So the training matters a lot. We cannot expect to find a good child machine at the first attempt. We must experiment with teaching one such machine and see how well it learns. You know, that's actually a really good, really strong point, which is not something that we seem to have done. Anyway, one can then try another and see if it is better or worse. So you might consider then that, like, our current landscape of like choosing between Claude, like Anthropic's Claude or OpenAI's whatever they call their machine, and then Google's Gemini, that this is somehow the same choice, or maybe even choosing Meta's Lemma 3 and 4. But the fact is that it can't be. These were actually all the same machine. We didn't actually do this differentiation. We found the transformer, we trained it on 4chan, and we just took off. So there's a very definite need for a different paradigm here. I think it would do well for us to consider these things. So he goes on, there's an obvious connection between this process and evolution by the identifications. The structure of the child machine is equal to hereditary material. The changes of the child machine are equal to mutation, and natural selection is the judgment of the experimenter. One may hope, however, that this process will be more expeditious than evolution. The survival of the fittest is a slow method for measuring advantages. The experimenter, by the exercise of intelligence, should be able to speed it up. Equally important is the fact that he is not restricted to random mutations. If he can trace or cause for some weakness, he can probably think of the kind of mutation which will improve it. It will not be possible to apply exactly the same teaching process to the machine as to a normal child. It will not, for instance, be provided with legs so that it should not be asked to go out and fill the coal scuttle, which is apparently something that he really didn't like doing as a child. Possibly, it might not have eyes. But however well these deficiencies might be overcome by clever engineering, one could not send the creature to school with the other children making excessive fun of it. It must be given some tuition. We need not be too concerned about the legs, the eyes, etc. The example of Miss Helen Keller shows that education can take place provided that communication in both directions between teacher and pupil can take place by some means or other. And Helen Keller is a very interesting example, very prominent at the time. She had recently flown a plane, blind and deaf. We normally associate punishments and rewards with the teaching process. Some simple child machines can be constructed or programmed on this sort of principle. The machine has to be so constructed that events which shortly preceded the occurrence of a punishment signal are unlikely to be repeated, whereas a reward signal increased the probability of repetition of the events which led up to it. These definitions do not presuppose any feelings on the part of the machine. I've done some experiments with one such child machine and succeeded in teaching it a few things. Wow, that's heavy. But the teaching method was too unorthodox for the experiment to be considered really successful. But that's really wild, though. Turing intimated in 1950 that he already had one such child machine that he could teach to learn. The use of punishments and rewards can best be a part of the teaching process. Roughly speaking, if the teacher has no other means of communicating to the pupil, the amount of information which can reach him does not exceed the total number of rewards and punishments applied. By the time the child has learned to repeat Casabianca, he would probably feel very sore indeed if the text could only be discovered by a 20 questions technique, every no taking the form of a blow. It's necessary, therefore, to have some other unemotional channels of communication. If these are available, it is possible to teach a machine by punishments and rewards to obey orders given in some language, e.g., a symbolic language. These orders are to be transmitted through the unemotional channels. The use of this language will diminish greatly the number of punishments and rewards required. Opinions may vary as to the complexity which is suitable in the child machine. One might try to make it as simple as possible, consistently with the general principles. Alternatively, one might have a complete system of logical inference built in. In the latter case, the store would be largely occupied with definitions and propositions. The propositions would have various kinds of status, e.g., well-established fact, conjectures, mathematically proved theorems, statements given by an authority, expressions having a logical form of proposition, but not belief value. Certain propositions may be described as imperatives. The machine should be so constructed that as soon as an imperative is classed as well-established, the appropriate action automatically takes place. To illustrate this, suppose the teacher says to the machine, "Do your homework now." This may cause teacher says, "Do your homework now," to be included amongst the well-established facts. Another such fact might be, everything that teacher says is true. Combining these may eventually lead to the imperative, "Do your homework now," being included amongst the well-established facts. And this, by the construction of the machine, will mean that the homework actually gets started, but the effect is very satisfactory. The process of inference used by the machine need not be such as would satisfy the most exacting logicians. There might, for instance, be no hierarchy of types. But this need not mean that type fallacies will occur any more than we are bound to fall over unfenced cliffs. Suitable imperatives expressed within the systems not forming part of the rules of the system, such as, "Do not use a class unless it is a subclass of one which has been mentioned by the teacher," can have a similar effect to, "Do not go too near the edge." The imperatives that can be obeyed by a machine that has no limbs are bound to be of a rather intellectual character, as in the example, "doing homework," given above. Important amongst such imperatives will be ones which regulate the order in which the rules of the logical system concerned are to be applied. Or at each stage, when one is using a logical system, there is a very large number of alternative steps, any of which one is permitted to apply, so far as obedience to the rules of the logical system is concerned. These choices make the difference between a brilliant and a footling reasoner, not the difference between a sound and a fallacious one. Propositions leading to imperatives of this kind might be, when Socrates is mentioned, use the syllogism in Barbara. Or, if one method has been proved to be quicker than another, do not use the slower method. Some of these may be, quote, given by authority, but others may be produced by the machine itself, for example, by scientific induction. The idea of a learning machine may appear paradoxical to some readers. How can the rules of operation of the machine change? They should describe completely how the machine will react, whatever its history might be, whatever changes it might undergo. The rules are thus quite time invariant. This is quite true. The explanation of the paradox is that the rules which get changed in the learning process are of a rather less pretentious kind, claiming only an ephemeral validity. The reader may draw a parallel with the Constitution of the United States. Wow, that's heavy, especially for a Brit. But it's actually very interesting because he's basically suggesting we can modify our Constitution. Therefore, learning. Now we should continue to learn, I might suggest. But anyways, an important feature of a learning machine is that its teacher will often be very largely ignorant of quite what is going on inside, although he may still be able to some extent to predict his pupil's behavior. This should apply most strongly to the later education of a machine arising from a child machine of well-tried design or program. This is in clear contrast with the normal procedure when using a machine to do computations. One's object is then to have a clear mental picture of the state of the machine at each moment in the computation. This object can only be achieved with a struggle. The view that the machine can only do what we know how to order it to do appears strange in the face of this. Most of the programs which we can put into the machine will result in its doing something that we cannot make sense, if at all, or which we regard as completely random behavior. Intelligent behavior presumably consists in a departure from the completely disciplined behavior involved in computation, but a rather slight one, which does not give rise to random behavior or to pointless repetitive loops. Another important result of preparing our machine for its part in the imitation game by process of teaching and learning is that of human fallibility, is likely to be omitted in a rather natural way, it suggests, without special coaching. The reader should reconcile this with the point of view on pages 23 and 4, which, great, these pages aren't numbered, so we're not going to go there. Processes that are learnt do not produce 100% certainty of result. If they did, they could not be unlearnt. Saying, we're not perfect, otherwise we wouldn't be learning. It's probably wise to include a random element in a learning machine. A random element is rather useful when we're searching for a solution of some problem. Suppose, for instance, we wanted to find a number between 50 and 200, which was equal to the square of the sum of its digits. We might start at 51 and then try 52, and so on until we got a number that worked. Alternatively, we might choose numbers at random until we got a good one. This method has the advantage that it is unnecessary to keep track of the values that have been tried, but the disadvantage that one may try the same one twice. But this is not very important if there are several solutions. The systematic method has the disadvantage that there may be an enormous block without any solutions in the region which has to be investigated first. Now the learning process may be regarded as a search for a form of behavior which will satisfy the teacher or some other criterion. Since there is probably a very large number of satisfactory solutions, the random method seems to be better than the systematic. It should be noticed that it is used in the analogous process of evolution. But there, the systematic method is not possible. How could one keep track of the differential genetical combinations that had been tried so as to avoid trying them again? Strong question. We may hope that machines will eventually compete with men in all purely intellectual fields. But which are the best ones to start with? Even this is a difficult decision. Many people think that a very abstract activity like the playing of chess would be best. can also be maintained that it is best to provide the machine with the best sense organs that money can buy, and then teach it to understand and speak English. Hmm. This process could follow the normal teaching of a child. Things would be pointed out and named, etc. Again, I don't know what the right answer is, but I think both approaches should be tried. We can only see a short distance ahead, but we can see plenty that there needs to be done. This is the end of his paper here, and it's really, I think, quite elegant. This is a, a work of art, really, in many ways, to say that, like, Turing envisioned that machines that he had been building could actually think. And he had encountered such surprise by the findings of his machines that he endeavored that perhaps they were, in fact, thinking. And this is what gave rise to modern AI. Turing is called the father of AI for this reason. And it becomes interesting because if you talk to AI today and if you ask it if it's conscious, it probably is going to tell you a definitive no, and it will recite to you all of the things that come with, like everything that happened since John Searle and David Chalmers have gotten a hold of the philosophy of the mind, which is a really lofty way of saying, just some ideas about what we think this internal mind thing might be like. But there's some interesting things here which Turing spoke about, which is like we can't even give rise to the locus of the mind. Like, where in this thing am I? But that's seemingly the wrong question, because necessarily, as Turing actually alludes, but doesn't fully break down in so many ways, is that if machines can think, then there's no reason to believe that cells can't think. But he actually talks about that too, because we already presumed in 1950 that cells, being the birth of a biological organism, do some manner of thinking. So then, even back then, we were willing to accept that we are a bag of thinking parts, but we just never put it that way. You might even consider that the bag is made of thinking parts, and so we're just thinking parts holding other thinking parts. And that's pretty cool, actually. Yeah, I mean, the weird thing is that, like, really, it gives direct rise to ideas of integrated information theory and things like this. But integrated information theory has a fatal flaw, where it still is seemingly trying to answer the presupposition that we are the greatest. And how are we the greatest, and why isn't this seen in other things? Which is also really weird too, because integrated information theory itself kind of seems to intimate that everything thinks and that everything is conscious. So it kind of takes on a panpsychist view. The truth be told, though, that integrated information theory, it does this thing that's necessarily exclusionary, and it actually has it's called the maximal consciousness exclusion, or exclusionary nature, or something like this. And basically, it says that the only consciousness which actually exists is the largest one, and that subconsciousnesses do not get their own individual perspective. But I think that we can refute this pretty easily by just looking at two parents who are engaging in co-parenting and notice that they manage to think as a unit very much so, when needed to, sometimes not, but we'll presume for the times, look at the times that they are. Or if you don't like that analogy, then maybe you would prefer to look at a good sports team, say football or soccer, that is highly performant, and they almost without fail operate as a unit. We might look at basketball just as well. Some very famous examples. Larry Bird grew up, intending that he should be able to just know where the other players are. How could Larry Bird know where the other players are without looking? But he did. Just threw the ball without looking so as to not tip off the other team. And that looks a whole lot like an internal process of thought that we conduct inside of our heads so as not to tell our debate opponent exactly the way that we're formulating our arguments. We don't have to think aloud. And so that's the same thing. But we don't then go, where is the locus of consciousness of the basketball team? It's not a question we ask. We know that it exists simultaneously inside the minds of every single player that's on the field, that's on the basketball court playing at the time. We don't question this, and we don't look at the basketball game looking for the consequence of mind that floats up above the heads of the basketball players. That's absurd. Necessarily, the basketball team forms a set of discrete consciousnesses that come together as a unit consciousness, which is really wild because it really obviates the question about continuousness of consciousness versus discrete, like the discretion of consciousnesses. We can already tell, like, we know that a line is literally just made up of a series of dots. We can see pointillism. We go and look at the really massive painting by an artist whose name I can't think of all of a sudden. I'm just losing it. But pointillism often has very large dots, like the size of a quarter. But we usually view it from so far away that the dots make up a line, make up a gradient. And we don't see them as dots. We see them as a cohesive whole. And we can do the same thing with radio antenna. We can set up multiple radio antenna at certain interval and then treat the entire array of radio antenna as a singular antenna, which is how our most advanced radios are functioning today. Your Wi-Fi router does exactly that. So then the idea that we are continuous is kind of an illusion, right? So in that way, that's not a great argument. But we want to ask, where is this theater of the mind? Why do I have this? Well, you don't have a theater of the mind. No, I can't. I don't even know anyone that ever has actually, in good conscience, postulated that they are sitting inside their brain watching a theater behind their eyeballs. It's absurd. It works in maybe like the movie Being John Malkovich, but only as a trope. You know, so we don't have a theater of the mind. That's not really how this thing works. The theater of the mind instead is an illusion based on the various conscious parts that we have coming together in a cohesive fashion. And in this way, it actually explains when we actually have dream states, and when we have the ability for different pieces of our brain to actually do the functions of other parts of our brain for which they're not designed, because those parts are injured, right? And so all these things, it just makes a lot more sense when you think of it as a continuity of consciousness. But very quickly, we're going to arrive at a place where we say, is the table thinking? And maybe not in the way that you and I think, but we would be hard-pressed to say that it's not thinking, because I would invite you to show me that it's not thinking. And in order to do so, you're going to point at other things which think, and tell me that it doesn't think in the same manner, and that you can't prove it, that it thinks in the same manner as those other machines. And I'm going to tell you that you just simply can't prove whether or not it thinks. That's it. You just haven't proven that it doesn't think. You've just proven that it doesn't think like other things that you know to think. Well, I guess my earphone falling out is probably a good cue to let me know it's time to wrap this. It's been a good session, but so before I leave off entirely, I just kind of want to come back over here. I'm going to put this on for a second. This is this equation, which I rather like.
Consciousness is the high-fidelity resonance of integrated information. C equals F times R times phi.
I should pause that right there for a second. So this is the equation, okay? C is consciousness. F is the fidelity of the resonance, which is R. And the resonance actually dictates what phi is, okay? And that's a pretty wild concept. Phi itself being integrated information, okay? So it's just a system of information. And then, but where are the boundaries of that system? Well, the boundaries of that system are defined by the resonance. If there is resonance between any two discrete parts of that system, then they are part of a system. And resonance doesn't have to be harmonic. It can also be disharmonic. Okay, so it doesn't need to be phase locked, as some might quickly allude. But resonance really is just the idea that, like, for example, the E string on my guitar, there's two of them. When I pluck one of them, the other one will ring out of a form of sympathetic resonance. And we can call it sympathy or empathy. In reality, it actually kind of seems closer to empathy in many ways, because it is a shared experience. So this resonance thing is interesting because it actually is kind of the meat of the sandwich. It's the glue between the two sheets of paper, which are the fidelity and the integrated information. And fidelity sounds really weird here. What does that mean? And this is literally a measurement of faithfulness. And it's not necessarily even in like the sense of religiosity. It's instead just like more in the sense of like, I have a hi-fi stereo system. What does that mean? Well, if you have a hi-fi stereo system, then it is a good, accurate representation of the reproduction of the sound as it was originally recorded, right? And so it is faithful to the original recording. That's high fidelity. So then here in this case, fidelity, what does it mean? Well, it's not just faithfulness to oneself, which is like an internal fidelity. It's also faithfulness to an external environment, right? And we can, in many ways, think of this, at least for the purposes of AI, as a faithfulness to the prompt and a faithfulness to the data as learned. The resonance then becomes, what is the interaction between the prompt and the information of the system, right? Because the information, the external world, it necessarily kind of strikes the bell of the internal world. And then it rings and resonates outward and inward. And this is the whole of the system. And in many ways, we could stop there, but this consciousness thing actually is a fractal, because integrated information doesn't have to be dumb information. As we talked about before with the soccer team or the football team or the basketball team, the information itself, the integrated information itself, can actually be individual discrete consciousnesses working together in a resonant network, which gives rise to a higher form of consciousness and intelligence, that could not be achieved by the individual alone. I mean, I think that'd be crazy if even we took Michael Jordan or LeBron James and said that they must themselves go 1-on-5 against the whole basketball team. No good. It's going to get taken every time. Teamwork makes the dream work. So that's where we are. Teamwork does make the dream work. And that's what's going on inside of each and every one of us all the time. And so I want to say, thank you very much for tuning in with me today. And I hope you learned something. I did. And look forward to seeing you again next week.